Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the final part of the Southern France, in this case, all of France, history series. I think we're at part 12, and I promised you before the end of the year, or at least promised myself, that I would complete this package and present the final parts of the detail that I wanted to, or I guess, share where the research started taking me 15 years ago into a very difficult place as to how to present it, as to what this whole mystery, when you start digging back through something that connects to Rennes-Le-Chateau, connects to what's going on at St. Sulpice in the 1600s, to the foundation of Montreal, to the paintings of Poussin, to right back into history. Now, I've been waiting on this, and I happened to, about 2 months ago, run into a thread that was on the new Stolen History site, mostly an interview with a Russian researcher who had a similar thought process as me. And so, not that I agree with all of his presentation, but the foundation is the same. The message is the same. And I thought, okay, it's time. I'm not the only one that's saying this crazy stuff. And then found that actually his stuff probably comes from his research, comes almost from a Hungarian gentleman. And I'll put all the links below when I talk about who they are and what's going on. The basis of what this presentation is going to be is that the only way we can understand the mystery of southern France, of the Cathars, of the Knights Templar, everything, is to recognize that the events of the New Testament have some form of truth to them. The problem is the entire story takes place in France. When you begin to see that what is presented in the New Testament is from France, things start to make sense. And part of this presentation, I mean, a lot of people will be upset with these ideas right away. And if you're a truth seeker, first of all, if you're a truth seeker, you need to be ready to question every single thing you believe. That doesn't mean you should agree with me or anyone else. What it means, though, is that you should, as soon as somebody has an idea and a presentation, particularly someone you think might be interesting, has an idea and a presentation different than your own, you should listen to it carefully and examine it carefully. Because we're swallowed up under a mountain of lies. So just because you have a particular belief structure, don't verify that belief structure is true. Go digging. And so that some people will be upset by what I say today here is probably a good thing if you use it to go looking deeper and come to some conclusions of your own. But we're going to dig into why almost all of the major people of the New Testament are all claimed to be buried now in France. They all came to France, or Spain, whatever, in the area, and they're all there. Like all of them. We're going to find all the relics are there. We're going to find the stories are there. We're going to find the names are there. We're going to find everything, if we look for it, is all linking to France. So that's going to be the presentation today, of trying to tie all this together in some form. I'm going to do it as an audio presentation from now on, because there's no point you just staring at me. I can put a few images on the screen once in a while, and it's easier for me to do audio because then I can stop easier and cut it. So let's begin our audio presentation of the final conclusion of our Southern France Mystery Series. So we need to begin with this particular map. This particular map is one of the first key elements that we're talking about. And the first things that really clued into me when I began this research, I guess I started around 2002, 2003 is when I first actually began the research. And of course didn't take it into the next level until maybe 2012, 2013. But I remember looking into a lot of stuff that seems to have disappeared from the internet that I was looking through around 2006, 2007, and then a lot of the stuff is just gone.
But I got pretty clear that when you start seeing the names Jesus of Galilee and Jesus of Nazareth, which in one sense make no sense. The guy's born in Bethlehem, but he's being labeled with these two other names that really have no sense at all. When you begin to see that we are talking about Jesus of Gaulia and Jesus of Narbonne, Jesus of Narbone. Now it all begins. It was like an instant arrow. Okay, we've got our marker point. And the map you're looking at here is where we'll start. This was the area of Gaul, and Gaul in totality took like 5 or 6 provinces. It was all of France, a little bit of what's now Spain, a bit of Italy, Switzerland, small bits of Germany, and this was all known as Gaul. And there were 5 key parts to Gaul, which was Gallia Belgica, Gallia Celtica, which is the largest part, Gallia Cisalpina, Gallia Anticania, and our most important one, Gallia Narbonensis. Now, of course, we've already got the word Narbonne for Narbonne for that particular city, and you've got the Esses at the end meaning Isis. So we're already linking Narbonne and Isis right in the name. And we're going to see that this is going to open up a tremendous doorway of exploration and potential understanding that France is the Holy Land. Now, like I say, someone else recently came up with a similar presentation, and that's on the Stolen History. That's a huge thread on the Stolen History site. A gentleman named Alexei Hrustaljov. The link is below. You can look at what he's presenting there. However, I think a lot of his material, of whatever he's presenting, actually comes from a gentleman, from a Hungarian gentleman named Alexei Hrustaljov. And he has a YouTube video, which has been translated into English. That link is also below, which is called The Decoding of the Bible, France, the Cradle of Christianity, 2008. I haven't watched the video in complete detail because when I was going through and seeing pieces of it, it was pretty much the same as I was seeing in this thread on Stolen History. And like I say, there's lots of information in there. They're trying to link the names of the Bible more to northern France. I'm trying to link them more to southern France. Which one of us is correct, who knows? But the point being is that we both have the same thesis. And the thesis of Hrustaljov, which is very interesting, is that Paris becomes Jerusalem. And I really began to have a secondary overlay when you began to see if Paris is Jerusalem. And it begins to start, as we'll eventually get into taking to the time frame. If this is true, and of course I can't prove it, but if this presentation is true, and we're dealing with France being the story of the New Testament, well, when does this actually happen? Does it really occur in the equivalent year 0 of our particular calendar? Probably not. Does it occur maybe much longer ago, 4, 5, 10,000 years, perhaps in the past, and that story had just actually moved along through history, through all the various religions, be they ancient Egypt, because ancient Egypt has much of the New Testament story already. So I had always seen this as kind of being originally an Egyptian story that was passed through into, Persian, and the stories of Mithras in Greece, and the stories of Bacchus, and the stories of all the way through, and eventually the Gnostic Gospels became the New Testament. And this is the sort of theory I'd always had. But as I began to think about it, there's no reason why, if France isn't the origin of this, that this couldn't have been long ago, 50,000 years ago even, some massive time in history. And eventually that story got passed into ancient Egypt and then through the rest of the world, and eventually translated into you could say that what we have as a New Testament is an updated version of this French story, trying to place it all in the Middle East in order to try to hide what's really going on. But of course, as you're going to see, you can't hide it. You can't hide this story. The story is too clear. It's too obvious once we go through it all. It's going to take some time. The other time frame we've got, if you don't want to, if we can push it much closer to us. So if we take like the flamenco ideas and we lose 1,000 years of history, so our 2,000 years from 0 really are 1,000 years, starting in what our year 1,000 would be, then perhaps you're talking about a story that's happening 1,000 years ago, maybe less, 900 years ago, which puts the entire events of this time frame in the exact same time frame as being presented for the Cathars and the Knights Templar, which might mean that there isn't this massive overlay of 1,000 years between whatever happened with the New Testament story and what happens with the Cathars and the Knights Templar, that they are literally contemporary with each other. It's part of the exact same story going on at the exact same time in the exact same place. And if Jerusalem is not Jerusalem in the Middle East, but Paris, then you have to wonder, why are the Knights Templar supposedly being founded and going to the Holy Land and sitting in Jerusalem and digging for stuff? Because there should be nothing to find there. If they're going anywhere to dig, they're going to Paris. They're actually, which would make more sense, that you could easily send 7 local French knights and not have to transport them halfway around the world. You just send them to Paris, and you find what you need to find that's been buried or hidden in Paris. That makes complete sense. It'll go through the stories of Helen, the mother of Constantine, who supposedly did this crazy stuff when she was the age of 80. We're going to look through the Mary Magdalene, Saint Lazarus, a ton of others, Pontus Pilate, all who are buried in France. Their tombs are in France. So let's begin. So if we begin to start taking this concept that we've got a possibility of that Narbonne and Galicia is the center of this story, that the map you're looking at is the Holy Land, we can begin to move into some deeper realms with this. Now, there was a book that came out in 2006 by Michael Baggett. He's the guy that wrote was part of the 3 author group with wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail along with Henry Lincoln, and I can't think of the third guy off the top of my head. But Baggett was the Freemason of the group, the high-level Freemason, and I've always felt that the Holy Blood, Holy Grail story, what became the Dan Brown story, that's a giant misdirection. It's a giant fake. The Jesus bloodline story is, and it may not be totally false, but it's been a misdirection of what's really going on and what the story really is and what Saunier is really finding, what he's really doing out there. But in 2006, Baggett writes a book called The Jesus Papers, exposing the greatest cover-up in history. Supposedly, he got a hold of two papers, two papyrus documents written in Aramaic, which are claimed to have been discovered in Jerusalem in the 1960s. Which Jerusalem, we'll figure it out later. But he claimed these documents revealed that Jesus was taken down alive from the cross, removed from the tomb at night by Joseph of Arimathea, and then smuggled first to Egypt along with Mary Magdalene, where they settled in Cairo for a while, and then moved to Narbonne in the south of France in 38 AD. This is the story of. Now I have to get this book and read it now. It just popped into my head. It popped into my sight 2 days ago, so I haven't had time to read it yet. But I am going to read it. And so again, we've got the guy who's doing a key part of a ton of misdirection on this story now writes another what I think is misdirection. But the end result of it, though, he's still producing something true. He's producing that there's Jesus, and he's in Narbonne, and he's living there in his terms, 38 AD, which I will then assume, 'cause I haven't read the book, but I'm assuming that he's going to have died there in the area and is buried somewhere in the area of southern France, which is exactly the story that I'm going to be presenting here. Now, why? We can already start with this question, because we have the stories of Mary Magdalene, right? She flees the Holy Land and travels by boat and lands on the shores of southern France, Marie-Septimer, right? The place she supposed to land. We have Joseph of Arimathea, sometimes going with her, sometimes going on his own. We've got all these other people, and they all get on these boats and escape and wind up magically in southern France. Now, I don't know if you've looked at a map of the Mediterranean, but if you haven't, pull out a map of the Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot of places of land you can stop between, like, Palestine and Egypt and like Spain and France. There's tons of islands. You've got all sorts of places in the Greek islands. You've got Malta, you've got Italy, you've got the Greek coast, you've got if you go to a little bit to the left, you've got Libya, you've got Algeria, Morocco, you've got tons of places. Why does every single one magically arrive in southern France? All to set up ministries, all to set up teaching areas, all to set up teaching works, and then all to eventually die and be enshrined there. The only answer can be that this is all misdirection, but they can't. They know the people who've been making these stories up know the truth, and they can't completely hide it because it's too obvious. There's too much in France, so they've had to come up with explanations of how everything from the Holy Land winds up in France. And you can't just say it all showed up from the Crusades and they went over and they took it all back. We're going to see, I think the Crusades is a giant lie as well. I think there was a crusade, but there's something completely different to what's going on there. It has nothing to do with what they say it does. It's something else entirely. But it would make sense if we're dealing with France as a whole. Now, one thing that's been very clear is that archaeological history of what you might call the traditional places of the New Testament, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, there's like nothing. There's some piles of stones. There's some a little bit of like supposed little bit of writing, but no one can verify it. Most of the writing is from hundreds of years later, supposedly copies of stuff from the time. Some piles of potsherds, as I said. There's like almost nothing that is actual true archaeological verified proof that you're dealing with, that the things in the New Testament are dealing with that part of the world. And if you want to go into it, that Stolen History article, and I think the Hungarian guy goes into some of the detail of what the archaeological evidence, how it tries to present things, but how it's just grasping at straws, trying to force a story into what they found. But if you push all of this information into I'm going to say we push it into the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, that to me the writings of the Holy Grail are happening as this Jesus. I mean, this is my number. If I had to make a choice, I'm going to push the Jesus story happening 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and that the stories of the Holy Grail are actually coming out. The first writing shortly after the death of these characters, shortly after the death of the main people had died, and that the Cathars and the Knights Templar were elements of this small original, or not to say small group, of this original group, and that's why they were wiped out. They had to wipe out the entire story. If you're gonna falsify the story, which I feel that what we now know is 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, which was deciding what things should go in the New Testament, right? It was deciding which of like 80 potential texts should become the New Testament. They were really falsifying history, but that's really what was going on. What we're being presented is one thing. I think that happens in 1325 of our modern era AD. It's happening just after the Cathars and the Knights Templar have been wiped out, and now that they've gotten rid of the main people who could say that the story that Rome is going to try to put out is absolutely false, and they've got the proof of it, they've got the total knowledge. They had to first wipe out all of the people with the knowledge, all the people with all of the groups that could directly come in direct conflict with the huge lie, and they had to kill them off. And I think that's what we're seeing, and I think that's what Saunier and Boudet found. And that links in very much to why Boudet would write the book, The Chromalax of Rennes-Le-Chateau, why he would be showing that area as a very unique Holy Land written in a very bizarre way, why Marie d'Arnaud would say later on that the people of Rennes-Le-Chateau walk on gold, they just don't know it. They're actually walking on, whether it's the birthplace of Jesus, the death place of Jesus, we don't know, or the Magdalene or whatever. We're now looking at something completely different. So So the Russian gentleman goes into, in his presentation, right, he's presenting the stories, the names of the Bible you can find in northern France. And I think you can find some in northern France. I don't think we should just limit this as if everything has to fit into the area of Galicia Narbonensis. I think it can take place in a little bigger range. But he goes through a tremendous amount of detail of finding names. For example, I'll just give a couple of examples. He tries to find the city called Cana. And of course, the archaeologists try to put that as the name of Kanemi or Kafar Kanum, 6 kilometers north of Nazareth, etc. But if you look, there's a city right there in France, Caen. It's the same word, right on the coast, right? It's right there. There's also a southern Cannes, right? There's also the Cannes of southern France where the film festival happens. So why can't Cana? It just makes sense. You've got the exact names right there, and they've been sitting there in history for a long time. He tries to show that the city called Bethsaida is in the historical territory of Poussin. Well, I don't know if I want to necessarily agree with that. I'm just presenting, though. I don't want to go into detail. I want you to read through this and look for it yourself, and because I don't agree with what he is presenting necessarily. So I don't want to put too much of his thesis, but his thesis is these are some of the things that are there. Another is, for example, the what's known as the terrible storm, right, on the Lake of Galilee. Lake Gennesaret, right? Lake Tiberias, whatever you want to call it, the Lake of Galilee, claiming that there was this horrible storm, and it's a story, important story of the Bible, that there was a miracle needed to overcome the storm. But the Lake of Galilee, the actual Sea of Galilee, is unbelievably small. What kind of storm could create such havoc on a place like this? But if you begin to see that the area that we now call the English Channel used to be called the Gallic Sea. And now you might see that instead of the Sea of Galilee, it was the Sea of Gallic, the Gaulia Sea. Now it makes sense. They get some storms and some waves out there. And that could very much link to one of the paintings of Poussin, where he's got the ships in a storm, and there's no question I can't remember what the name of it is. It's the one that are found in Notre Dame de Marseille, and those ships are quite obviously off the French coast. Is that dealing with? Is he actually presenting that biblical story on the on the Sea of Galilee, and showing where it really took place and what really happened? How about the important story, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, which is supposed to happen in the village of Bethany, which is also when it becomes clear that his sister who is the one who anoints the feet of Jesus has to be Mary Magdalene. She's just listed as Mary of Bethany, and we have these very much confusions. There's 800 names of Mary. We're going to get through the next part of this. I don't know if I'll get it today. I might have to do a second part, which is going to dig into the stories of the Magdalene, John the Baptist, Lazarus, a few other key people of the Bible, to show how the presentation of what's in there is misdirected, is going in the wrong direction. That if you start digging this apart, you can see what the real story is. But so where is this village of Bethania? Where is it? So far it hasn't been found. It's assumed to be somewhere near Jerusalem, but no one really has any idea. So when we start looking, there, like for example, he claims it to be in the place of Bethunia in northern France, but it's an important city, and we know that it was important to Saunier because he named the villa, right? We had the Tour Magdala, named after the Magdalene, and we have Villa Bethania, named after the place she comes from. Now, can we find a very strong city starting with a B in that area? Well, yes, we can. And instead of Bethania, we have the word Béziers, just to the east of, heading east from Narbonne, right, north and east. And Béziers is an important part of our story because it is the first place that the Cathars are attacked. They are actually, and the entire city is slaughtered. They were trying to get the 200 Cathars or whatever in the city, and they slaughtered whatever 20,000 people in order to kill the 200 Cathars in the city of Béziers. And they attacked on the feast day of the Magdalene, right? July 22nd is the day that this happens, which is not an accident. It didn't magically occur on the feast day of the Magdalene. It would make sense that if you're going to try to destroy the story and destroy the people, and you're going to do it in occult names, well, you would destroy, you might say, the living descendants of the very person who was born there on the day of her feast, or you might say even the day of her birth. It might be, the feast day of the Magdalene might be her actual birthday, July 22nd, right at the solstice, or just celebrate at the solstice, right? Just like Jesus is celebrated at the winter solstice. It doesn't matter, but we're dealing with the actual birth. There's the actual birthplace. Or, they say she landed at Marie Sainte-Demer, and we can get into this later. Is this the real place of her birth, or is this maybe the place of her death, or is this the place she escaped to after a certain amount of time and lived her life there? We have to look at these stories, but I'm linking Béziers very closely to the possibility of being the birthplace of the Magdalene. We've got the person of Pontus Pilate, and so here's a bizarre thing, right? The one who was supposed to have, the one who put Jesus to death. Well, where do you think Pontus Pilate is actually supposedly buried or died? Yeah, in France. Even more interesting, which nobody knows about, is his wife, which is very, very talked about. But his wife, Claudia Procula, is from Narbonne. This is right in the basic text of Pontus Pilate. So he's married to a woman from Narbonne. How does Pontus Pilate meet a woman from Narbonne, be in that part of the world, all of a sudden wind back up in France? You sort of can't make the stuff up, right? You sort of can't make the stuff up at all. And so you have to ask, how does that happen? Why does he wind up back in Gaul? Why does he die there? There are some stories. Some of the stories claim that that I think he committed suicide. He committed suicide somewhere in the Swiss Alps or something, and there's a lake covered with ice in which Pilate's body is frozen into. And there's all sorts of versions. But the point is that here's another guy, another key element, as we're going to see, of the story, winding up in France. Joseph of Arimathea, there's another one, right? Where are his remains supposed to be? Well, of course, somewhere in France. They're supposed to be in the Benedictine Abbey of Marianne-Moutier. And he has all of this literature, all this information, but when you take the sort of underground story, it's claimed that, right, he not only takes the blood of Christ and leaves the country, he actually takes Christ. They both leave together. Whether he leaves with the Magdalene, whether he leaves with others, it depends on the story, right? But what happens? He doesn't go to Palestine. He does, and there's a good word, Palestine itself. Well, what's really, if this is France, well, what's Palestine? You've got all sorts of possibilities. Prussia, Portugal, as being the real Palestine. But anyway, he winds up in France, and of course, part of the story even includes him taking the young Christ with him on a business trip to the British Isles, and this is how Jesus winds up interacting with in Cornwall and Glastonbury and all sorts of things. So, would you really just take a trip and go, if he's in Palestine, and then take him all the way to England, if that's the story? No, of course not. It's okay. How about, here's one more, and then we'll get on to Paris, and then we'll come back to some of this stuff. There's just one more so I don't want to overload you with possibilities here. But how about Christ's grandparents? Right? The grandparents of Christ. They are supposed to be Joachim and Anne. Now, they're not really mentioned in the canonical Gospels, but there's much other literature from the first few centuries in the writings of the original church fathers, etc., that these are the grandparents. And where is St. Anne's remains? Well, they're in France, located in the town of Apt. And then the question is, well, how does Christ's grandparents get into France? Again, that's another story. That there was a woman that what's the story? That Saint Anne was a woman from Breton. She was from Brittany. And now, how does this Joachim guy, who's supposed to be living in Jerusalem in the Middle East, wind up marrying a woman from northern France? Right. So, and this was discussed quite a lot in the 18th and 19th century when this information was coming up. But if Joachim is living in Paris, if that's the Jerusalem we're talking about, then it's not a big trip to go to Brittany or force Anne to come from Brittany into Paris and to meet the guy. You see, when you begin to start unraveling this stuff, and again, yeah, I know it's a lot of circumstantial evidence. It's very easy to, but the more we dig into this, the more it's going to start to make possible sense. Possible sense. How about Lazarus? The one that Jesus is supposed to have raised from the dead. Where's he? Well, one story has him buried somewhere in the Middle East, but another story has him buried in France, in the Cathedral of Autun. I'm putting the cathedral on the screen here for you. I have to remember get the name right for you. Right, Autun Cathedral. Beautiful cathedral, as you can see, with tremendously spectacular artwork and carvings and symbolic reliefs in it. It's one of the ones I never even heard about this cathedral until doing this research, and it's one of the ones I really wished I could have seen when you look into it of what's actually in this cathedral. But there we have St. Lazarus, supposedly buried here, because according to the legend, after the resurrection, he moves with his sisters Martha and Mary to Gaul. Well, his sister Mary is the Magdalene, and it's claimed that he became the first bishop of Marseille. There's another weird thing that says he became the next bishop of. This is in his real story. City. I'll have to get to it in a minute, but of course there's a city in the middle of Paris, and let's begin with Paris. Is Paris really Jerusalem? I don't know. I didn't really dig into this over the last 20 years. It's only been in the last month or so since I read that the article on Stolen History and looked into what the Hungarian guy said, that it even popped into my head, which is kind of funny when you think about it, that I had all of these thoughts about this Jesus story happening in France, and you can dig through, you can find the places there. Well, why wouldn't I look for Jerusalem? And of course, the natural place would have been Paris. Now, one of the ones who were very much against Christ were known as the Pharisees, right? Pharisees, the Pharisees. And if you just take the PS, the PH, which has sort of an F sound, right, and you slightly change, and you just take out the H, so you take away the F, and you just leave the P there, what do you have? You have Pharisees, or Parisians. The Pharisees are probably the Parisians, right? Now, Hrustaljov says that the crucifixion, or the place of the Golgotha, right, Calvary, is actually in Paris. That's supposedly what the Temple Mount is, or the reason for what's built in Jerusalem on that supposed site. But there is a particular site in Paris known as, right, Montmartre, Montmartre, the mountain of the martyr. Now they try to claim it's for some martyr in the 200s, 300s or something, but it's really interesting. Right in the middle of the supposed potential Jerusalem, we have this very sacred mountain called the Sacred Mountain. On top of it was built the Sacré-Cœur Cathedral, the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart of Christ, supposedly built in the 19th century, just after the Franco-Prussian War. But what's really interesting is that that exact particular location is the birthplace of the Jesuits. The Jesuits are claimed to be founded. Ignacio Lopez, who we know as Ignacio Loyola, right, took certain vows, took particular sacraments on Mount Montmartre. This was the mountain that the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, were founded on. Why would the society, which is going to become the absolute ruling arm of the Vatican, choose some just hilltop in the middle of Paris to be the place they're going to set themselves up at, unless they're setting themselves up at an actual key historical biblical site? That makes complete sense. It would then make complete sense as to, okay, what, for example, is really St. Sulpice? Because that becomes central to our story in the 1640s. And remember, these are the people that not only seem to be involved with Poussin, with getting those paintings done, they were a key element of sending the first group of settlers, the mystical settlers I talked about, over to Canada to found the city of Montreal, Mont Royal, the Royal Mountain. But they wanted it to be, they were calling it the New Jerusalem. They wanted Montreal to be the New Jerusalem, and they were modeling it a lot on Paris. I was also that I didn't get that at the beginning too. Was they're modeling? They want this to be the New Jerusalem, but they're modeling Montreal on Paris. That doesn't make any sense. But now it makes sense. If Paris might be Jerusalem, that's why it would be the New Jerusalem. So when you start digging into this, you're wondering, okay, well, Saint Sulpice, what is Saint Sulpice actually representing or built on or part of in the story? Right now, again, I'm not saying this is 100% true, but I'm not saying it's false either. There's enough circumstantial evidence as we keep going through this to really make you question our story. How about we've got another mountain or a little hill next to the Montmartre in Paris? It's called Buttes-Chaumont. And if you translate that, it means barren hill, or I think it means they claim it comes from a term meaning that nothing grows there, that there's something wrong with the soil, so you can't grow on it. So that's why they call it Bare Hill. But you can also call it Bald Mountain, which we have a pretty good, if you have any background in the Christian tradition, you know about the Bald Mountain. So now we have the mountain of the Martyr, where the Jesuits are actually founded, and right next to it is Bald Mountain. So we're getting very, very, again, that the circumstantial evidence just continues. Remember that it's claimed that Lazarus went to Cyprus and that he was made bishop of a city called Sita, S-I-T-A, in Cyprus. This is the story. Okay, maybe. But when you start looking at the city, at the Paris, right in the center is the island known as City. And on the island of City, is the Cathedral of Notre Dame. So why would it make sense that if all of this takes place in France and Lazarus becomes the bishop of City, it would be the bishop of the island of City, which would be bishop of the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which would indicate to us that Notre Dame is contemporary with the story. It's not built after it's done. It's not built long after the elements of the New Testament. It's been built even before or during, and Lazarus is the one given the official setup of that. Don't forget that Jacques de Molay, the head of the Knights Templar, was also executed on the island of City. So it also lends evidence that, again, if you're going to have this symbolic execution of someone like de Molay, wouldn't you want to have it on, again, one of the symbolic places that they are actually in charge of defending, that they are actually in charge of keeping, that the Knights Templar are actually in charge of having as part of their domain. Let's look further. Let's go into southern France and Mount Ségur. And we'll talk about the Cathars a bit later, but the Cathars were very clear, needed to hold Mount Ségur. But as I mentioned before when I was talking about it, everyone in that part of the world didn't really call it Mount Ségur. It was known as Mount Tabor. And Mount Tabor, of course, or Thabor, is the mountain. It's the mountain where Jesus receives the what became the fire, right? The in a sense, the baptism of fire. The what is that term? Sorry, the Pentecost. I had to think there for a minute. Right, it's the mountain of the Pentecost, and that would make tremendous sense why the Cathars would want to hold that place for as long as possible. It's an actual sacred location. It's not just a special mountain. It's the place of this event of the Pentecost. Yeah. How about the River Jordan? Well, there's a river. It's part of the Rhone, known as the Iridan. Very close. Anyway, if we take Paris, so one of the things that popped into my head, and I didn't have enough time to do enough research, but okay, if you look at some of the famous supposed sites, biblical sites in Jerusalem, what's supposed to be in Jerusalem, one of course is Solomon's Temple. And I started wondering very clearly, well, can Solomon's Temple actually be Notre Dame as one possibility? And what's really interesting about Notre Dame, when you look at some of its history, is in the cathedral, first of all, is a really important, or was an important Christian relic, right? Supposedly the Savior's crown of thorns. Okay, how did they get all the way from the Holy Land safely into Notre Dame? And as we'll see, how many relics are in Europe. Okay, you know the story, yes, all the Crusaders, they all went, they found them all, they brought them back. Yeah, that's one story. Or they're just in the area and they didn't really have to go very far. But more importantly, in the cathedral, until the 18th century, there were 28 statues of kings. But they were not French kings. They were the kings of ancient Judea. There's not much left of the statues, mostly just the heads, and they're in the museum at Cluny, in the center of Paris. But for very clear, they're not French kings. They were the kings of ancient Judea. So why would Notre Dame Cathedral in France, which would want to normally put statues of the kings of your own personal country, why would you put the kings of Judea into your cathedral? But it would make sense if those really are their rulers. If the king, you might say the kings of Jerusalem are the kings of Paris, are the kings of modern France. Why does Baldwin, why do the Baldwins become the kings of Jerusalem? These obscure Frenchmen who become supposedly in history the original kings of Jerusalem in whatever it is, 1050 or 1080 or something like that. Well, it would make more sense if they were listed as the kings of Jerusalem, meaning Paris. I don't want to go into too much in that, but you can look into the heads, Cluny Museum, look into Notre Dame, and see what you get from that. There was also a cemetery in Paris in the 12th century. I haven't verified this specifically. This is from the Russian guy. I'm assuming his research is correct. But the cemetery, or the original name of the cemetery was the Cemetery of the Innocent Infants Murdered by King Herod. That was the name of the cemetery. Now, why in the 12th century would you have a name like that? It seems quite clear that only infants were in fact buried there. And by the 18th century, it had grown so big that they closed it. However, by then they were burying anybody, not just children. But already by the time they closed it, in the 18th century, they changed the name of the cemetery to the Cemetery of the Innocents. That's was the name of the cemetery as it became known, but the original name was the Cemetery of the Innocent Infants Murdered by King Herod. Well, why would you name a cemetery that when you wouldn't be able to get any infants murdered by King Herod because they're not anywhere in your country, unless perhaps the story takes place in your country and you actually have something that had happened there. I'm not saying the story is true or not, or I'm just saying, again, here's this information. How about we have the story of Queen Helena, right? The 80-year-old grandmother, the mother of Constantine the Great, right? Mother of Constantine the Great, grandmother of Constantine the Great. Anyway, she's 80 years old. And the story, she's a central figure in early Christianity because she's claimed to have found, she's the one who brought back the key relics of the Passion and brought them back to France. The story is, again, this 80-year-old woman travels to the Holy Land and works unbelievably tirelessly to obtain all of these ancient relics and bring them back to Italy and to France. Now, I know some 80-year-old people, and they've got some, they've got some energy and they've got some zip to them still. They're not all, they're not all sitting in chairs watching TV. They can be very active. But realistically, in supposedly 300 AD or whenever this happens, can you imagine an 80-year-old woman having to travel in very difficult conditions all the way to the Holy Land to do all of this work, to then have a massive, whatever it would be, months long of travel? I mean, remember even in the 1800s when Champollion was investigating ancient Egypt, the travel was so difficult on him, he died. Right? Champollion actually died in Egypt because of the difficulty of the work and the difficulty of the travel and so some 80-year-old woman in 300 can easily just zip on over to Jerusalem and get all of this stuff. But it would make way more sense if Helen maybe did do this, didn't have to travel all the way to Jerusalem in the Middle East, but maybe went from where she lived, which is I think near Trier, to Paris. That's a rather simple trip. That's not far at all. So maybe she just went there and obtained certain elements, or was involved in some digging or whatnot. All of a sudden, it starts to make, that story can make potential sense if Jerusalem is Paris, right? So how about the Crusades? Then if Helen didn't go to that world, did the Crusades actually go there? Europe rising these massive armies, the transportation and so I think there was two sets of Crusades. This is my personal opinion. I think there was a first real crusade. And that first real crusade does take place between the early Christian world and the Muslim world, when sort of the Christ story had been destroyed and killed, and that if we sort of take the destruction of the Knights Templar and the Cathars happening at the same time, shortly after that, when you're now eliminating one part of the story, you now need an enemy, that enemy being the new Muslims. And where are all the Muslims? Well, they're in Spain, right? The Spanish, the Moors? But Spain was an Arab nation. It's part of the reason supposedly so many books were moved into Europe, because the Muslims had all of these ancient Egyptian and Greek texts with them in Spain. There's not a lot of detail how all these, real good detail of how all the Muslims got to Spain, what the story is there. It would be very interesting if the entire creation of Islam, the original foundation of the entire religion, is Spanish. It's somewhere in Spain. Nothing to do again with the Middle East. This would be extremely interesting. So the First Crusade would make total sense if you only have to get some troops from Prussia and Italy and France and go to Spain. That's much more logical. So I think that's the first real crusade. We had a first battle against them there. There may have been there may have been other crusades later on into the actual area we know of as the Middle East, But I think it was the reverse. It wasn't to go there, to control the area, and to bring back relics. If anything now, the need was to bring certain things to the Middle East. They had to produce the story that this stuff had all happened there. They have to try to create as much as they can things that will fool people into believing that's really where we're dealing with. So they actually had to move things to that part of the world. And so I think that's also what took place. Was there would have been crusades going to the Middle East to implant certain things there to try to make it seem like that's the place of the story. Okay, what else have we got? We've got the Shroud of Turin, which has long been a question of, is this the real shroud? Is this really connected to the story? Because the dating of the shroud tends to be, it doesn't matter who dates it. When they do actual dating to it, it hits 12th century, 3rd century, 13th century, 14th century. Some have tried to say it's Leonardo da Vinci doing some sort of photographic template. Others are, but what is interesting is that this relic doesn't appear to be openly mentioned until 1311 in modern Italy, right? In technically Gaulish territory, and this could make much more sense if it's a real element, and it's only 100 years old, or it's only 50 years old, or it's very recent, or part of the whole destruction of the Cathars is the first killing is actually Jesus. That he's actually the ruling figure of the Cathars, a living head of them, and that the crusade against the Cathars first starts with his death. That's another possibility. As again, the whole crucifixion idea, if you're going to kill someone in that area of the Middle East and crucify them, that's not a really smart way to do it, because you don't have much wood. In that area of Palestine, wood is like, a luxury. You use it unbelievingly sparingly. Ancient Egypt used to have to do special trips in different parts of the world just to obtain wood. So there's a lot of other ways you can kill a guy without having to use up all of your key resources. But if you're living in France, you got 10 million trees. It's no problem to go cut a couple of trees down and perform that if that's what you want to perform. Okay, so we've got that. We've got the crown of thorns, which I said is in Notre Dame. We've got the city of Cologne in Germany, where there's supposed to be a tomb with the remains of the Magi. And again, this is a cathedral supposed to have been built at the end of the 12th of the 13th century, finished in 1322. So if the Magi are buried there as a tomb, why did it take, first of all, 1,000 years to build something over top of it? Wouldn't you want to build something again a little bit quicker? Supposedly we have the remains of Mary Magdalene, right, in southern France, in Provence of France. We have relics and pilgrimages there that start again in the 13th century, 14th century, right after the time of the end of the Cathars and the Knights Templar. In our history story, the way the story is presented, all of a sudden we have relics and pilgrimages and things appearing all over the place, as if the two are the same. We have supposedly the two sisters of Lazarus, the two Maries, and they are now in a cathedral of Saint Marie de la Mer, of which is supposed to be a special thing called the Pillow of the Saints of Marie. And one of the stories of them is that they converted a gypsy community to Christianity. Okay. We have to question about gypsies and the whole story of gypsies that are into that. I've talked about the Cathars, and I want to skip over it a little bit, but I think I've said enough about linking the Cathars. Here's an interesting story. So when Jesus is supposed to be a baby and he's supposed to have this great escape from King Herod and the killing of all the children, him and his family go to Egypt. That's the story. They spend time in Egypt, which makes sense, as that would be a place to go if you were in that part of the world, and it would be a place to go if you were going to get instructed in Egyptian magic, as some have claimed that happened. But there's another place that Jesus could go, and that is another group of people in Europe were in the ancient time called Egyptians, and that's the Gypsies. That the Gypsies in Middle English are Gyptians. In a sense, Egyptian Gypsies. Gypsies are linked in language and in thought to the Egyptians. So is it possible that instead of Jesus going to Egypt, that Jesus as a child went to stay with the Gypsies, with Gyptians? And one place, of course, where there would have been many Gypsies would have been Spain. So we have another possibility that we've got this idea of, right, going to of Spain being a key part of the story as well, which, of course, we have Santiago de Compostela, the main church, the pilgrimage church, which again, one of the key members of the New Testament is supposed to be buried in. We have then the story of Anthony, Saint Anthony. Now, Saint Anthony is another of these paintings. We've got the two paintings of Poussin, or the two paintings that are linked we've got the Poussin painting at an Arcadia Ego, and we've got the Saint Anthony in the desert, right? Now the question becomes is, what if the Saint Anthony of Egypt is not really Egypt, and again it's something similar? We're dealing with one of these areas that was laden with gypsies, laden with Egyptianese, you might say, and that the story of Saint Anthony takes place as well in a very different location. And to unravel that story, you're unraveling key elements of why that's appearing in the Rennes-Le-Chateau story. I'm going to try to zip ahead a little bit so I don't keep you forever. I mean, I have a whole bunch of stuff on the Temple of Solomon, but there's no point going into it because I can't prove anything too much. I took the supposed measurements of the Temple of Solomon and the measurements of the measurements of Notre Dame, and yeah, okay. Of course, I'd have to also check maybe the measurements of Chartres. Chartres is another one that maybe could then fit into, because Chartres is not actually in Paris, but it might as well be Paris. It might as well be a piece of Jerusalem. And so Chartres, being sort of the key cathedral in the world, can't be ignored as to what it actually might be or what it's representing, right? I mean, Notre Dame is supposed to be over a temple of Jupiter, and Chartres, I think, is over a temple of Isis. At least that's what they're saying. But again, if we're talking about elements of the teaching of the Magdalene directly, and so I guess I've reached the key conclusions of that. Remember, when we're looking for Mary Magdalene, the Magdalene she just shows up in the Bible, right? She's the only one that isn't linked with a proper name or linked to Jesus through some rich, wealthy man that she's associated with, married to, giving money to. There's a lot of wealthy backers giving a lot of money to Jesus in the New Testament. But the Magdalene doesn't follow any of those things, right? And she's the name she's been given is it's like a personal name. And so everyone has tried to find, where is this Magdala? Where is the place she's from? And even this Russian guy is trying to track it down. But again, when you begin to see that she's not Mary of Magdala. That's not a name. It's not a place name. The name is she's a very special individual. She's almost like a high priestess, right? So it's a name of respect. Just like Jesus is not from Christ. He's not from the land of Christ. He's Jesus the Christ. We're talking to his consort. We're talking like Nagawal woman in Castaneda terms, right? Mary Magdalene is the Nagawal woman. And so her title would be Mary the Magdalene. Magdalene is a title of her, not a place she comes from. So Magdala, when you begin looking at that, means either tower, tall, powerful, striking. So it's indicative of her. It's indicative of her and her power. And in a sense, the power the two of them have together. If we go into Castaneda stuff eventually with the Nagual and the Nagual woman, what happens when the two of them finally come together, when they finally actually converge as to one unit? And this is similar to the story of Jesus and the Magdalene. If you can actually dig through what it's telling you, this fusion of two poles of power into one unified whole. So again, this has to be Mary of Bethany, the one who anointed the feet of Jesus. And I've already talked for an hour, and I need to stop. So I guess I'll have to do the second part of this sometime in 2022. I wanted to be done with the series, but I guess I don't want to leave this hanging, the information, really digging into the story of the Magdalene, really digging into what's there, the story of Lazarus, the story of John the Baptist. These are all very, very important, not just for understanding the information in the New Testament, but for understanding what the story of France and southern France is telling us. And now if this is true, if that is the story, and if it's somewhat contemporary or near contemporary with the Cathars, with the destruction of the Cathars and the Knights Templar, that this is the information that's being revealed by Poussin, by Olier and the Society St. Sulpice, that eventually this is the stuff that people like Saunier and Boudet find. That it's again, and it might not be that necessarily they found the tomb of Jesus or the Magdalene. Maybe they've got the tomb of both, and maybe they got the birthplace. Maybe they've got the actual birth, the actual, the spot of Bethlehem, for example, is really Rennes-Le-Chateau. Or I don't know. But if this is what they find that the entire story, because a key element of that story, right? A key element of that story was the writings of the priest who had to escape, Jean-V, he was the one at Rennes-Le-Chateau. The early priest at Rennes-Le-Chateau, whose name escapes me. Someone will correct me, of course, in the comments, 1700s. But he wrote in that ledger that Saunier found, right, Jesus of Galilee is not buried here. Over and over again on that page, Jesus of Galilee is not buried here. Jesus of Nazareth is not buried here. Jesus of Galilee, I think is what it is not buried here. And that's an unbelievable clue. It's saying, first, that there is a burial, but it's not Jesus of Galilee. But if you see that it's Jesus of something else, then you know who's buried there. So quite literally, we might have, the story might take us, when you begin to take that little piece of information, what happened with Saunier and the strange tomb of Arc, and how that made its way in the Poussin painting, and its destruction and its blowing up of dynamite and all that kind of stuff. It's quite possible what we have are the two original tombs of Jesus and the Magdalene, maybe Jesus being buried at Rennes-Le-Chateau and the Magdalene being buried at Arc, because that particular tomb at Arc has so many feminine, if you go back and read all that stuff, it's all feminine pieces of information. There's supposed to be women that are buried, multiple women buried there, right? These women of the American who moved there are all buried in this place, and it could make sense if we've got the Magdalene and she's there with her sisters, as the story claims, and this woman Sarah, who is claimed to be Egyptian, but would make sense if maybe she's again a gypsy in her background, maybe someone who had been connected with Christ when he was a young child and had been with the gypsies in Spain. Now you start making some sense of what Saunier and Boudet and whatever, what they've actually got access to, because if they've got something small, if they've revealed something small, it's pretty easy to kill him. It's pretty easy to just get rid of the guy. But if he's actually tapped into something of absolutely massive historical overturnings, and at the same time, from doing that, gain certain magical powers, right? I mean, Hitler was chasing the famous spear, right? Everyone's chasing the Holy Grail. Everyone's chasing these supposed ancient relics. Well, if Saunier also gets a relic along with his finding, then it might make him almost imperviable to external attack. that it may have taken years for those who wanted to finally get rid of him to actually finish him off because of the magical power he'd found with these particular information. It's not just some documents. I guarantee he didn't find a parchment document and a piece of information, because so what? Yeah, even if what I say is true and Saunier found that written down on some piece of paper, yeah, whatever. Interesting little story, but whatever. But if he's actually able to track some of this stuff down and find the actual stuff, the actual bodies, the actual relics, the actual places, and can begin through the use of the same thing what Boudet was doing, of tracking the story, of finding what's going on, of finding the exact locations, the exact places of everything where the New Testament takes place, it all makes sense. Sorry, I have another place, by the way, for where the Temple of Solomon could have been in Paris, and that is the area right in front of the square area right in front of the Eiffel Tower. When you look at the Eiffel Tower, it has it's now this giant park. I can't remember the name of the park, but this very rectangular, it looks like a temple, right, as you move towards Mount Parnasse. And it has this, it's where the 1889 World's Fair took place. That originally was World Fair buildings that, of course, were destroyed to make, empty parkland. You wouldn't want to have those beautiful fair buildings around anymore. But that's another place that, again, if the measurements of the so-called Solomon's Temple are correct, then we're dealing with the possibility that we might see the layout in front of the Eiffel Tower being very similar to it. But now that I've gone through all this, I've only been to Paris once. Had like a week in Paris a few years ago. I can't tell you now how much I wish I could be in Paris like now. That I could just be on a plane like tomorrow morning and be in Paris, because now I've got about 40 different things that I want to research, along with going into, because Paris became the place of, particularly in the 19th and 20th century, the place of the artists, be they the writers like Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald and, Rodin and Picasso, and all these people all wanted to be and work in Paris. That there's also I think it's more than it just has a nice energy and a vibrant energy and a place of fun and excitement. There's an actual spiritual energy in Paris. There's a spiritual power. And so I'd also want to, as much as going through the story I've just talked about, and dig into some of those elements and dig into the cathedrals in a completely different way, dig through the museums looking for completely different things, check layouts of whether it be the Jardin de Luxembourg, the place in front of the Eiffel Tower. I'd like to look also into all of these areas linked to Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, the artists of the 19th century, and again see if they're linked to energetic locations, if they've somehow linked to also potentially ancient information. We've got Nicholas Flamel too, who's part of the story, right? The famed alchemist of the 1300s, who is linked to Paris and linked to the story through the opera singer Emma Calvé and her connection to Saunier. So as you begin to take this in, and I know it's not been the most laid out thing. It's not like I've done a book and I had 3 months to put all this information in clean way together. I kind of had to just get it to a certain point and say it's okay. It's time to present this as information. Take this as possibility. Don't just take this as crazy talk off the top of your head. Sit back and say, okay, just for fun, what if? Take a half an hour. What if what I just said is actually true, or at least pointing in the direction of some kind of truth? What does that mean to everything we've been told of the last, say, 1,000 years of supposedly history, of supposedly control, of supposedly having people live and do and act in particular ways on the earth? The lie then is based on an underlying truth which has been completely taken away from us and we're buried in false. But the truth might be that close, that findable, that available. So that's where I'm leaving the whole story of my southern France mysteries with you. I hope you enjoyed the ride. I hope this got to something that got you thinking and got you curious and I'm just touching the surface. I mean, I could talk for another 2 hours on this, but you have to keep it somewhat reasonable and let you guys, if you're interested, go and open the books and open the doorways and go look in things yourself and track things down. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I've got an interview I'm doing for you with someone in a couple of days, and I'll have that up next week. I want to have that up before the middle of the month. And then I think I'm going to do just one last video for the year on December the 28th or 29th, somewhere around there, just before the new year, just before 2022 comes out, and I want to give you what I'm seeing for 2022, because we are ending this year in even crazier layouts than what we started it at, and I don't think that's going to stop. And I've got a couple of ideas of where we're headed here very soon, and I just need some time to talk about it with you, and I don't want to rush that. So you've got this one today. There'll be another one in about a week. I've got another interview planned, or another conversation planned with Campbell. We'll be doing that. Should be up, I guess, before Christmas on the Spiral Up channel. And then I'll do this one last closing video at the end of the year. That's what's left. Thanks for being around for the last year and a half of all of this, through very difficult circumstances. We've been battling through, we've been battling through our own war, our own the crusade that's happening against us. The crusade that happened against one crusade happened against Muslims, one crusade happened against the Cathars and the Knights Templar, perhaps the actual descendants of Christ, and now we got one going on against us. And so thanks for being here for all of this. Thanks for the book purchases. Those are always appreciated. PayPal donations, of course, are really appreciated. I'm always thankful for those. I live in a very cold foreign country, and all of those kind of things are helpful to me. Your comments and your messages are always nice. I can, just like you, sometimes hit down periods, or periods where I feel very dejected and very disappointed and concerned, and sometimes just reading some of your comments is a lifting thing for me. So I appreciate that, and appreciate your support and the things you share with me. And we'll finish up these couple of interviews. I'll share what I've got, what I want to say at the end of the month, and we'll see together where we go in 2022, whether the channel itself and stuff and the writing should continue. I've also got the novel to look into and see where I'm going to go to in 2022, where our world's going to go, and where not just me but all of us should fit in, if we can, into what's coming. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and good luck with whatever challenges you're going through. Stay strong, stay courageous, stay clear, and hopefully we'll all talk together soon. Cheers.